Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. You are listening to Inside Method. This is a continuation of our series on human development and what that means to method. So if you are inside the company, great tool to check out. Lots of great information just on the approach that we take as a company to invest in our people, develop our people. But also, if you're not part of the company, maybe you're on the client side or just interested in learning about this content, maybe this is something that's helpful for you to take to your people, instill in your culture. We hope you find it helpful. So we're sitting here today with some wonderful people. You have already heard from John Tudors, who is the voice on the last couple episodes. And today we have some new folks visiting, Michael Gray and Kat Carter. So thank you all for
Glad to be here.
Coming to hang out with us for a little bit. So, John, tell us a little bit. What are we talking about today, and what are we going to be getting into?
This is good. I appreciate the time. I appreciate you guys coming. Continually invest in the people. That's what we're about, in the human, and unlocking that human potential. So, the topic, and I'm very excited about this. The topic we're hitting today is relational intelligence. You know, if a client says to me, or somebody says to me in the street, or a student, "Hey, what's the difference? What's the difference for method? Why are they different?" Pretty much my answer is 100% of the time, nobody invests in relationships like we do. Nobody has the intelligence level of relationships and the importance of relationships. So I'm excited to talk about it. There's a lot of research in this space. There's a lot of documentation around not only today being more important than it maybe was before, but we're in this weird, hybrid environment, this post space that we're just still getting used to, and the relationship aspect of it and know how to build a relationship couldn't be more important. So I'm excited. I'm excited for you guys to be a part of it. There's a lot of books on this, and we'll talk a little bit about from experiences. I'd love to hear, Michael, your experiences in the development space and the folks that you work with, as well as clients, as well as outside in the real world, right?
Absolutely.
Kat, as I mentioned to you this before we jumped in here on the microphones, there's not many people in the world with an intelligence level of relationships and you know the importance of it as much as you do. And the humility you probably bring to it, not knowing how good you are at it, is the part why I want you here, right? So
Thanks.
I'm excited about it. So, let's kick this off. And Michael, I'm going to toss this over to you. And, let's tell everybody, what is relational intelligence? Like, how do you view it from your lens? What do you think about when we talk about that?
Well, it's really two things that come to mind, right? Right off is really relationships, right? And so the ability to connect with others. And so, that really shows up in a couple different ways, right? So your ability to, one, be willing to enter into this relationship, right? How are you showing up to connect with others, right? And the intelligence, right? Being thoughtful, mindful about how you're connecting, about what the other person is, reading body language, active listening. So I think all those things really kind of come together in terms of your ability to connect, well with others.
I love it. So Kat, we say relational intelligence. What do you think about, and just for the audience, why is that important? Why do you see it as being important?
I think I like the phrase for two reasons. I'll take the second word first. And kind of, I think, piggybacks off of all of the work that was done in the 90s and beyond around EQ, but just the fact that we attach the word intelligence to it, tends to be something that feels, I guess, aspirational. It's something that, people tend to want. And I think that that's important to kind of attach like a high value word to it, as something to pursue as much as you do anything else in your career, or even in your personal life. In terms of the relational part, I agree with a lot of things that Michael just said in terms of the active listening, really just from day one, minute one, trying to figure out opportunities, whether conscious or not, because it's learned or it's purposeful and intentional to immediately build empathy, and pursue a relationship where both parties are benefiting. Maybe not always at the same time.
That's a great way of putting it.
But over time, you can still see evidence of that as well.
I love that. And, Josh, one of the pieces, you mentioned the influence word in there too. And one of the pieces, Josh, that I want us to walk through today, there's a 5-step process really in building out, and you can't skip it. We all want to be influencers today, right? That seems to be the term that everybody, but nobody wants to put in a lot of the time. Or when you do, you really start to understand you can be an influencer. So Josh, I want to walk through kind of those steps and really take through each one.
Yeah.
But I want to hear from you, like when we say relational intelligence and we knew we were going to be hitting on this, and you and I have talked about this, is how's method difference? Well, here, what do you start thinking about when we start going into this terminology?
I think one of the reasons and I'm not saying this just because I'm on the podcast here, but I genuinely enjoy working with the people we have here. Like, it's not just, it's not just putting up a front to try and make everyone feel good. I think this is one of the few places where I've been where I feel like culturally, I think there is something different, and I think a lot of that is because of the intelligence that we're talking about here. And I think a lot of it has to do with we're surrounded by a lot of folks who, when you're referencing the empathy portion of this, like that is palpable in so many ways here, where I think it's probably more common for folks to go through their everyday at a place where that's taken for granted or not valued as much, so that people are just walking through with the assumption of you're here to get a paycheck, do the job. And that level of empathy, where we're not just talking about taking it to our clients, but taking it towards one another, and realizing like, hey, how can I serve you? And what's going on in your world that could potentially be impacting the work that you're bringing to the table? Yeah. And is there a way that I can influence that for the better? Those are regular interactions that I have with people here that I don't think are super common. So as we're unpacking it, those are kind of the first things that jump out to me that I do think, to your point earlier, it does kind of make us a little bit unique from a lot of other places I've seen.
It does. And you're right, and you feel it. Our clients feel it. I mean, whether it's clients we've had for years or just, in the first 6 or 7 months, they feel it. So one of the first things when you talk about relational intelligence, again, it's building blocks. The first one, and this is, MG, I want to get your take on this, building rapport.
Yeah.
Building rapport, as easy as that sounds, you can't get to the next 4 without the rapport. And one of the pieces it talks about in the book, which I really like.
And real quick, the book, what is the book that you're referencing?
So the book, there's a couple of books that I've read on this now, and some of the peer reviewed. The one that I'm speaking to with this particular quote comes from Dr. Bentelli, called Relational Intelligence. And he breaks down probably one of the more simplistic, which I need, ways to be able to grab it. And the quote that he talks about in there is, with rapport, it's being willing to use energy in order to positively connect. And for me, that's intentional. That positive connection, the willingness to put energy forward. You have to do, it doesn't just happen. And so that quote, and thank you for bringing up the piece of the book, but I'll quote a couple of things, but that one area when he talked about rapport, some of us it comes easy and some not. So MG, what do you think when we talk about rapport as that first step in building this out?
Yeah, I think tangibly, one of the things I noticed that when I first started working here was the number of questions that others asked me, and it wasn't just certainly about my qualifications to work here, but about me, about my interest, and there was an intentional effort to find connection points.
Yeah.
Right. Because with those connection points, all of a sudden, then we're able to have these broader set of conversations that lead to deeper relationships and that sort of thing. So I noticed that there was both common and, to your point, Josh, a regular sort of interaction, right, with others that, hey, you are intentional about reaching out and connecting with me and really wanting to bring me into the fold.
Right.
Right. You're not just simply the other person sitting beside me, right? We're going to be in this together. So let's actually build some relationship.
I love that. And there's got to be some curiosity.
Absolutely.
That's a big word.
Did you feel that? So Kat, coming in the method, thinking about building rapport, and you have a lot of platforms that you work with, right? And you think about coming in the method, working with clients, a lot of the work that you do outside, is it easy to build rapport? Do you feel it when people are trying to talk to me about that component? Because it is it's natural for some and it's not natural for some.
Yeah.
But everybody I've been around, at least here, fully understands the importance of it. What's your take on that?
Well, I'm almost going to kind of take it first from maybe the harder day that I would have in building rapport for the first time with someone, or, you know, or early interaction. I guess dirty secret or not so secret, I'm an introvert. And so there are days where, you know, someone's like, hey, can you jump into this meeting and talk to this person? And I'm kind of like, oh. and I think I love the way that this book frames it, because it is about giving your energy to that room, even if it's a virtual room, right? And just kind of like, you know, pulling some resource from within, even if you're tired. It's easy, I think, easier to build rapport when you have a natural energy around the community, around the topic. It's harder when you're, you know, you're unsure of yourself, you're tired that day, things like that. And that's why I like the casting of like, hey, you still need to put the energy out there and see what comes back. And I think that can be as simple as acknowledging people.
Oh, I like that.
The curiosity thing, you know, expressing interest in other people and, you know, how they're acting, what they're thinking. And I think inclusion, just making sure that the whole room feels like they're a part of whatever's happening, and noticing when people are not, you know. I think all of those things are like the building blocks of starting to establish that rapport, not just with the person that you may be the most interested in, but, you know, maybe some other people that are in the room that aren't getting as much energy as the main person, you know, because there's usually a main person, right?
Yeah, and you know, it's funny, one of the Chris Manley, of course, who works here and has been, you know, one of the OGs here at Method, really gave me a great insight one time, and he changed his question when building rapport. Instead of "how you doing" to "what's on your mind." What's on your mind is a really interesting, curious question that it pauses people.
It does, yeah.
Right?
That's a good one.
So I said to you, "Hey, what's on your mind?" You got to think for a second. "Hey, what's up?" Nothing. That's an easy answer. Right. How you doing? Good.
That's right.
Good.
Right?
Yeah.
What's on your mind? So when he posed that to me, I don't know if anybody's as good at rapport as that, as he is. So that was kind of I like that. I'm going to take it. I've used it with students and said, "Hey, what's on your mind?" And you know what I got back? "You're the only person that's ever asked that." Multiple people, multiple students. And you're the only person that's ever asked that.
When I think that speaks to a certain level of sincerity.
Yeah.
That
That's a great call.
we've had some discussions prior that might kind of have some bleed over into this topic in the world of networking, right? And so a lot of times folks look at networking as some people are all about it and other people are not. And there's multiple types of networking.
Yeah.
But the one that I think people, for the most part, are immediately turned off by are those ones where it's like, this just feels so disingenuous.
Forced.
Yeah,
Like you're
forced.
just
Yep.
trying to like weasel your way in. And so coming into something, how do I establish that I'm here because I want to help?
Right.
And maybe there's something that we can make each other stronger by. Like that kind of questioning goes a long way to establish that.
I love that. I love that you said that. And that's true. People will see through the insincerity or the unauthentic.
Yeah.
People see through it. The force, "Oh, how you doing?" "Good, how you doing?" You know, the worst thing that I've seen happen when somebody's trying to build rapport with me, whether it's a new business person or somebody in the street, whatever, they shake your hand and there's no eye contact. Yes. Eye contact to me is extremely important in building rapport, right?
Yeah.
If you're looking away from me, being from Queens, I got a little problem with that, right? But the reality is it's forced, or you don't want to. The authentic self is not there. So yeah, rapport to me, it can be easier for some. And Kat, I'm glad you brought that up, because even as long as I've known you, it still boggles my mind that you're an introvert, because you're so good.
Yeah, you're an extroverted introvert.
Yeah, but I know where you get your energy from.
It's a learned
skill.
Yeah,
It's an amazing
everything.
skill.
We can unpack that later, but like I think everything about the way that I grew up
Yes.
enabled that.
It's a good call.
So
It's a good call.
I think that's a gift I didn't know I was being given, but
It is a gift. And the piece that I read in the book too, and I've read through a lot of research, is you can learn rapport. You can learn how to be better at it and sincere at it. I think one of the biggest things I saw in interaction with students and then read is we all have concentric circles. And what that means is we have a lot more in common than we don't. And you just have to find the commonality.
Yeah.
And I think in the true sense of relational intelligence, knowing that in rapport, you do have something in common with that person. I don't care if you think it's far-fetched. I guarantee you have something in common. And I think that's one thing that we can all start with new client or new teammate or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Find the common.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
Yeah, I was going to say, Kat, I really appreciated your comment about being introvert, because I'm very much an introvert. One of the things I find is sort of being intentional about the environment that I'm in. So there are times when there are certain environment factors that help me bring the energy, right? So if I can create a situation where it's less noise and it's more one-on-one, I find it easier for me to fully bring my full self to that.
Yep.
And so there are times where I might sort of maybe pull someone more to the side, or maybe try to invite someone to something where there's little, it's more us. And so, that's part of that intentionality in that is sort of both, if you can reflect on who you are and where you're able to bring sort of your full self to that, where you can do that, that can also help you show up and feel authentic as well.
Yeah.
I love that.
And it brings it nicely into the second phase, right? The second phase.
And real quick, let me interject real quick for folks who might be kind of taking notes, not as familiar with the content. We're going just to run through, if you want a quick Cliff Notes version of what we're about to get into, the 5 categories, and then we'll go back and dig into those a little bit. So establishing rapport, understanding others, embracing individual differences, developing trust, cultivating influence.
No, that's perfect.
So for our note takers, there you have it. And then now we'll dig into
this is where
those a little
Josh
bit more.
keeps us straight.
He's our rudder.
That's right.
Thanks,
It's good.
Josh.
And now you can kind of note underneath each. And the one we're going to now is understanding others. You build that rapport. You now have the right to understand others. And that's when the EQ comes in heavy. That's when but to the point you were just bringing, that's why I saw that bridge, the self-awareness is an important part of understanding others. Tough to understand others if you don't understand who you are.
Yeah.
And so that's a big part of it, right? So really taking the time, and we do some of that here with, the Enneagram and other things, Strength Finders, trying to figure out like self-awareness. You're at a point where now to understand others, you built a rapport, understanding others. What do you do? So talking about different styles, everybody's got different styles. What do you do to understand others? What are some of the questions, or what are some of the things you do to intent? Because there's intent there. What do you do? What are some of the tips and tricks or thoughts?
I mean, obviously icebreakers. No, I'm kidding.
Icebreakers, they always work.
Speaking of course. No, I mean, I think you do sometimes learn something from a well-timed and well-organized icebreaker. This goes back to what Michael was just saying. I think that there's modes in which you get to do that are most comfortable for you, and then other ones where I think you have to kind of be a little bit more intentional. And it's modes of communication, like channels too, that I think I'm thinking about. For instance, I don't really like talking on the phone. I don't know what it is. And especially in this day and age, because we have cell phones, it's so easy to be multitasking when you're on the phone. Texting, everyone is allowed to be asynchronous and answer at their own time. One-on-one, most of the time people can stay pretty engaged when you're right in front of someone, and I think phone is that like unhappy middle for me. I try, but that said, I think this goes back to what you were saying about curiosity. Whether you have 10 seconds to engage with people before somebody else joins like a meeting, or just sitting down with somebody and kind of being an interviewer. This is one of the things I miss about like writing is getting to fuse like a natural curiosity for a person or a subject or something like that with a list of questions. I think it's fun. I think it's interesting to learn about people and know that somebody's lived a different life and had different experiences and thoughts.
Tick.
Yeah. And to me, when I think about like the best interviews that I've had, like those are thrilling. I carry that energy the whole day, regardless of, what ends up on the paper, that moment. And I've even recorded some of them because they're so compelling. And I think, that you use that word, I'm probably going to say it a lot, but it's like the natural curiosity, again, whether it's 10 seconds or a channel that you love or don't, just
It helps you understand.
being interested.
Oh, yeah.
You know,
Think about what you just said, being interested. When somebody is being real, being interested in you, that's an incredible feeling.
it is.
It is.
Think about that. It's their
Especially
time.
now.
Yeah.
Especially now where it's so easy
Yes.
to be disinterested
Distracted.
and distracted.
Yeah. That's because we all have the same amount of time. Right? We've talked about that in some other series. Your asset of time, and you're going to give it for curiosity and learning about somebody else, that's a gift.
It really is.
That's a big
Yeah.
gift.
Yeah.
That active listening, right? That's something
Yeah.
I work on constantly. Actively listen. Don't listen to respond, but actively listen to understand. You know, all you Ted Lasso fans out there, talking about, you know, you think about the scene, he's in the bar and he's playing darts and he talks about people back in the day judging him,
Oh yeah.
but it was because they weren't curious. If they were curious,
They might have caught.
they may have understood him a little better, right? And so, and then he said, you know what? And I realized it's not my problem. They're not being curious. They're judging. And it's an important piece. Like, to understand someone, you've got to be the question person. You've got to be curious. You've got to have active listening.
Yeah. You know, with the questions, I think open-ended questions.
Oh, I love
Right.
that.
Open-ended questions that allow someone to expound, and, you know, sort of the active listening a lot of times is sort of, oh, I heard this, right? Let me then this gives me sort of the permission, if you will, to
Yes,
then
good word.
sort of then ask this lead sort of follow-on question, right? So those open-ended questions allow people to expound that then will oftentimes sort of expose different things about who they are. The other thing that's sort of interesting is there's some of you that are out there that are what I call observers. And quite often, if you are willing to be quiet, watch, and listen, you can also pick up things about people as they interact with others. And so, you know, that may allow you sometimes to then bring something back into a conversation. Oh, hey, I noticed in this situation that this happened or whatever else. I was really curious about that, right?
Yeah.
Can you tell me more about that, right? So oftentimes actually watching, being observant and listening will actually help you sort of pick up on things, right, intuit things, but you can also then bring that back as you try to engage with someone.
Yeah.
I think the thing that sticks out to me as I'm listening to the responses you all are bringing to the table here is, as you're looking at establishing rapport and understanding others, it's hard to do a lot of those things well if you're not consistent with it, if you're not spending time doing it. I think a lot of us, me, myself included, we want to just jump to the end result, and we want to be able to just get there. And to your point earlier, like, these take time.
Take time.
And so to earn that right to like have somebody who now is willing to give you their time to get to know them, that's a huge privilege. But that doesn't just happen because you said, I want to. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
you
right.
can't demand it. You
That's right.
can't force it. And you're exactly right. And you know, one big thing to take away, Josh, to the point you're bringing up is you have, in order to influence, right? Because really in life, I mean, you want to build trusted influence. That's the goal, right? In order to do that, you have to have the intelligence to know you can't skip anything.
Yeah.
You have to have the relational intelligence to understand people, right? You got the rapport, check. You understand them, understanding others, right? And now you have to go through the rest.
So if I can build real fast off of something that he just said, you know, I think we've talked a lot about like verbal, but I think there's a lot of nonverbal body language, what people do. So I think a perfect example is my partner, right? So, you know, I think he speaks a lot more about who he is as a person and the things that he does and what he puts his energy into than verbalizing stuff, right?
Yeah.
And I love what you said about like it's making that investment in time, and that it's a privilege that someone is opening that up to you. You know, but I want to make sure that we also talk about the fact that it's not just what people say, because either they may not be talkers, their
behaviors speak loud.
They may not know themselves enough. And so, you know, as we're all trying to get to know each other, everyone can think about a progression of like a really strong relationship they have and like what they thought about the person on day 1, day 10, you know, month 3 and year 15. And hopefully, most of us, can think of that person and say like, wow, I really actually know this person now. I thought I knew this person on day one, but
I've seen consistent behavior.
the combination of what they said and what they told me on day one, combined with all of these other really just data points actually makes me understand this person now.
I love that. So now we understand people. We understand others, right? We build a rapport. We understand others. Once you understand others, you understand there's differences. And so the third piece of really relational intelligence is embracing, not just understanding now, but embracing individual differences. Very difficult to build trust and then influence if you can't embrace the individual differences. I know coming in the method, we're all different. Our backgrounds, our approaches, right? And a million and one other things. And until you embrace it, because sometimes you don't have control over the differences. Most of the time you don't have control over the differences. Client differences, right? So let's talk about that. Embracing individual differences, big part of it, right? Because if you can't, very difficult to move further. So what do you guys, when you think about that step of it, what comes to mind? What are some of the maybe hurdles or ways you look at it?
I think for me being a minority, I often came to that conversation as being the one that was different. Yeah. And so there was always sort of showing up with, how do I help folks understand, I think to the point, John, you said earlier about those circles, and that in fact, those differences aren't necessarily in some cases as big of an issue as someone might, so at times, how do I minimize those, right?
Yeah.
And then at other times, how do I sort of shine a light on where I think those can be positive? So sort of reading the room, sort of understanding that. So for me, oftentimes I came to the conversation from being the one that was different and trying to figure out how do I sort of navigate that.
Right.
That's been instructive for me as I get into, let's say, when the topic of engineering, right? That's a male-dominated space, right? So how do I embrace the differences of having, women, in the team? And so much of that has been about, I think we've mentioned a lot of the factors, right? Curiosity, actually reading and research, like understanding that when you have blended teams, right, your outcomes are better, right? So some of that is having conversations, B, reading, getting educated and learning about it.
Right.
And then some of it's risk taking, right? Are you willing to take a risk, take a chance, and then experience it, right? So it's not just sort of head knowledge, but it's like, let me open up and embrace this difference and sort of take time to sort of see how it works out.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And, embracing it, the risk-taking thing's interesting. I hadn't thought about that. It is taking a risk. I one of the pieces, move away from work for a second, go to personal life. Hardest part for me over the years is starting to realize that not everybody reacts to things the same way. Mm-hmm. We're going through the Enneagram right now here and realizing everybody's so different, yet we need every bit of it.
Yep.
And getting to the point of understanding, okay, I don't understand why somebody would react this way, or I don't understand why somebody would think about it this way. It gets to the point early in my career, it was like, well, if I don't understand it, it must be wrong, right? If the difference, right? I was like, if I don't fully understand, there's differentiation here. And I never embraced that it was different. I just embraced that if it was different than the way I thought, it must be wrong.
Yeah.
Right? You realize as time goes by, you're the one that's wrong most of the time, right?
Yeah.
So that's the piece where I try to get to is the thought, the embracing the individual differences in how someone thinks and reacts. And a lot of it is because of it's all their history.
Yeah.
Regardless of what their history is.
Yeah.
That's what creates it. And I have a different history than all of us, right? And so it's okay to have the different thought or reaction.
Yeah.
It's embracing the fact that it's okay regardless, right? Mm-hmm. So anyway, that's the risk piece is interesting because it is a risk. It is a risk. And it's sometimes that's not a comfortable risk, right?
Yeah, I was just going to say, as I was thinking about this, and this is mostly going to come from like a personal perspective, similar to what you were saying. I guess what I would start by saying is, one, this step is not natural for people, and it's particularly not natural for people in a specialized society. So everything that we do in terms of like, moving people into a professional place is become an expert at this thing. And when you do that, typically you separate from more and more groups of people, right? Maybe you get to work with them on a cross-functional team, but your tribes are set, right? It's also, I think, not natural because we were built with these like intact fear mechanisms that are supposed to protect us when they're being utilized correctly. And can be weaponized when they're not. Right.
That's right.
It's natural.
And I think that that's part of where maybe some of this good fortune comes. Similar to you, I'm a minority. I'm also a woman, but I grew up in a bicultural home. I had to experience that firsthand every day of my life, whether or not I was conscious of it as a child. I had to literally embrace myself as a person, and how people might understand me or not understand me or whatever. And my parents, who came from two very different upbringings and, trying to interpret sometimes as a kid for your parent, for the other parent, or, explain, why somebody, that was all built in. And then on top of that, growing up in military environments and a super diverse community in Maryland, I got an opportunity to kind of like learn that along the way. And then I came into a very technology-driven profession through studying literature. And when you're doing that, literally your upper level classes are sitting in a room with other people. You're all reading the same book and everyone's walking out with a different understanding.
Right.
Not to get too postmodern about it, but like you start to break down these notions of like right and wrong and think more in terms of like, how are people perceiving this same set of text?
Right.
And all of those, I think, became kind of tools to do this very hard thing. I'm not saying that, I get it right all the time. I don't. But I think that this is a very challenging step because a lot of people, everybody can see the differences.
Yeah.
But running to it and embracing it
Running into the
versus
fire.
running back to your community, whatever that is, personally or professionally, that feels safe.
Because that's the easy.
That's what humans want to do, right? Of course we do.
Yeah.
But there is a pot of gold there. And I don't know. Like I said, I think that's when that happens for people and they get excited about it, and you flex that muscle enough times, and you know that it leads to an exciting outcome or a better outcome, it starts to feel less fearful. I know that was a lot, but
No,
that was
I love the
great.
consistency of it.
That was great. And I think from the business case or the business value that brings, the story you're sharing and the experiences you're talking about, MG, is, we are creating products and experiences that are not limited to tribes, right? And
exactly
people
right.
like we are creating these things that are impacting everybody.
Yeah.
Like no matter what your culture, no matter where you're located, we have such a broad reach with these things we're creating. So, and that's where I know you both had mentioned at some point, and one of our core values even is seek perspectives. And a lot of that is rooted in the idea of that background and that history that you're bringing to the table, that all of our people are bringing to the table. Everyone's going to have something to contribute that ultimately can benefit that end user even more. And how much of a disservice are we doing to ourselves and our client if we're not embracing those things, right?
That's right.
So just from like the business side of it is like we don't, as far as I see it, like we don't have an option. You have to do this. But on a personal level, it's like, man, how much better of a
More
result.
fun.
Take a risk, sample, and go outside, but embrace it, right?
Yeah.
We have, one of the other pieces here, as more people come in the method and we grow, as more clients and different cultures that we're working with inside these different companies, we're gonna have differences in thought and everything else, right? So the idea of embracing it and embracing running into the fire, embracing the risk of it, it is easy not to embrace it. Embracing and accepting are two different things.
Yep.
Accepting it just means, okay. Embracing it means I appreciate, applaud, and want to understand and the individual differentiation and embrace it, meaning you can leverage it too, right? That's the difference. And I think that's probably a key difference in the two words.
Yeah, one thing to your last point I was going to say is that I think I've become a much more well-rounded person, because in embracing some differences, at times it's actually triggered things in me. I'm like, oh, I want to know more about that, or actually I want to try that, or I want that. And so it's led me to these set of experiences and interactions and relationships that were not necessarily top of mind,
right?
But once stepping into those, they have really expanded who I am.
Yeah.
And I think and what I can bring. So it's actually been pretty enriching,
right,
for me, both personally and professionally. To your point, Josh, to actually embrace many of those differences.
Well, and that's, I think, a perfect segue into the next section, which is developing trust. Right? You're not doing that. You're not willing to take on some of those experiences learned by the people you're surrounding yourself with if you don't at some point get to the position where I trust your opinion. I trust you as like the person you've let me see that, like, now I'm willing, I want to see what that's like, and I might not ever have gotten to that point where I'm willing to do that prior without first stacking through all of these steps that we're discussing. But so developing trust, obviously, like a huge part of this. I'm curious kind of how integral to everything we're talking about is this specific step. Yeah, I mean, to me, getting to this point, I love the term they use, developing. I love the term they're using in front of each of these, of kind of sitting there and establish, understand, embrace. I love these terms they're using in front of it, because I think it goes well. Developing trust, because it's a process. You don't develop 100% trust right away. I remember a question posed to me many years ago. Who do you trust 100%? That's an interesting question, isn't it? Mm-hmm. So it's always developed, right? Beginning of a relationship, the rapport happens. You're understanding who they are. You're embracing any differences. But now you're at the cusp. You don't just, it's not automatic trust, right? Trust isn't just given. You hear that all the time. It's earned or developed. That's the term. So for me, getting to this point of saying, now it's my right, because I've gone through these others, I can start developing trust. And yes, have I developed some of it during the way? Yes. But the reality is, here's where the investment goes. Here's where, being who you are and doing things behaviorally, like you said, the behaviors are consistent. You're doing things that make sure the other person understands you have their best interest in play. So the developing word, I'd love to get you guys' take on that, because it takes a lot to develop trust. You know how quick you can lose it.
Yes.
Right? And then guess what? You don't just start at number 4 again. Right? So let's talk about that. Developing trust. I think internally here amongst our teams, new talent, ongoing, our senior leaders continue to do things that show that trust continues to develop. Clients, the same thing, especially starting with a new client or a new project team, right? Talk to me about that. The word developing is interesting to me with it.
I actually really like the word in juxtaposition of the other word that's more commonly used, which you just used, which was earn, right? Because earn almost sounds like it can happen like in a one-time event, right? Like, I've done this thing and now I've earned your trust. It's like a paycheck that you get, right? Developing, I literally think of like a development, and a lot of times developers are starting with what? Like bad soil. They have to level and, put some pylons into it, get it stable, and then they lay down a foundation, and then they build the structure, and the last thing you do is hang the curtains. And I like that. It feels like a much more rich word, and not the propensity to think of like, there's this one thing that I can do and now I have your trust. It is, again, a time factor. It's an investment. It's a conscious effort, over a lot of different stages and steps and activities that ultimately lead to this, moment where somebody has, said, okay, I trust this person. And that can happen in like I call it like the summer camp effect, where it's like super intense and you spend 3 days together in a workshop or something like that, and you're all best friends. And it might take 3 months. It might take a year to earn that kind of, develop that kind of trust, I should say. So yeah, I think it's a very conscious word choice there.
And I think it's an ongoing, and I know, MG, you had an example of one of those that you've been working with, but I think it's an ongoing thing. I have had friends, or relationships with somebody maybe 15 years, could be somebody who works in Charlotte. I'm continually developing higher trust levels.
That's right.
And higher trust levels and higher trust. And I don't think that ever stops. I truly don't. I mean, think about, your family or what have you. You're always developing deeper trust levels. So again, I don't think it stops. And when we get to this last one around, cultivating influence, to me, there's a parallel here. As your trust level continues to grow with an individual, so does your ability to cultivate influence.
That's right.
Right? If you spent 3 days at a workshop, you built trust, but nowhere near the ride or die friend from 15 years ago, where that you can influence. There's an old, not too old, but there's a movie called The Village or the Town, I think it is, and it's with
Ben Affleck.
Ben Affleck, and he brings up that line of, look, I need you to take me here. I'm not going to tell you where I'm going. We're going to hurt some people. And the guy goes,
you can't ask any questions.
Right, no questions. Whose car are we taking? That's developed trust over a long period of time, and the influence factor is through the roof, right? So I want to see what you guys think about that. I mean, it's not a yes, no. To me, it's a scale, and it's a scale that you can continually build on. So Mike, what do you think about that?
We've actually said these core words that really come to it. We talked about consistency, right? We talked about reinforcing, right? Repeatability. Those things really cement trust and continue to allow it to sort of, grow and get deeper, right? So our ability to show up and folks have a reasonable understanding of we're going to do what we say we're going to do, right? We're going to be able to react and respond in a particular set of ways, in most cases, right? And those things reinforced again and again really continue to really foster, enable, and develop, sort of the layers of trust there. So I think all these things that we're hitting on are really parts of that.
Yeah.
I actually have a question as I'm listening to everything everyone's saying is, I know we're discussing from developing trust from a perspective of what can I do to earn or develop your trust. Is there an element of this that trust can be developed or trust can be earned by giving it?
Ooh, that's an interesting question. I think,
or I guess what
kind of
role,
like a friend in need is a friend indeed.
Or if there is, what role does giving trust to others play within this, or does it have a place there within?
I think it does.
I think it does.
I think it does. I think the vulnerability comes into play.
Yeah.
Right. Trust is about how vulnerable are you. The more you trust someone, truly, the more vulnerable you are. And so I think you have to give it to get it. That would be my quick answer. Michael, what do you think?
I was thinking about actually in a professional context of when we think about developing leaders, quite often you need to put them in a position of responsibility and say, this is part of your growth. So I'm going to trust you with this body of work, with this particular deliverable per se, because in extending that, right, you're being vulnerable, right? But you're also then helping them to step into that opportunity to then deliver, to then sort of grow in that role. And so as they deliver on that, you're able to trust them with more sort of work. So as part of how we think about growing people, it's important for us to extend that trust. And actually with that trust also risk, right? To allow folks to grow. So very much we need to extend that for others as well.
I like that.
I 100% agree with that, especially as managers, just giving people an opportunity, if they ask, for sure, even if they don't ask, to get to be out front. And then, if it goes well, great, you've earned their trust. And if not, then, there's coaching opportunities and you've earned their trust still through that. But I think that that's a much better outcome than kind of like saying, no, I'm just going to do it all myself.
Yeah.
And then, your team, I guess, almost kind of gets suspicious. I remember feeling this way. I was in a pretty intense environment like early on in my career. And I worked with managers who were very open to letting, junior members of the team participate and present in big ways early on. And then I worked for opposite, personalities. And the former group built trust not only, between herself and us, but amongst each other as an entire body because of that, that behavior. So it's a great question.
Yeah, the consistency is key there. I mean, I think back at folks that I've built trust with and vice versa over time, and it's the consistency of, they did what they said they were going to do, or they were a person of their word. Those kind of things like that. To me, that's a continual trust builder. The other piece I would say is, there's a lot of, I remember talking with students as we're going through social capital and networking, and they're like, well, how do you just call somebody after you haven't talked to them in 5 years and reach out, and all of a sudden you just catch up and they can help you with something, or you can help them, or somebody reaches out to you after 10 years and you'll help them because the trust level was built to a certain point where it withstood time.
Yeah.
And to me, as a company with our clients and then internally here, your goal and our goal, right, should be to build the trust level to where time doesn't actually matter. It's always going to be there, right? And to me, that allows where you're not starting from scratch. You may have rapport again to kind of catch up.
Yep.
But the reality is it's do not pass go, do not collect. You can just keep going, right? So to me, the trust factor, the biggest part, and I want to slide us into the fifth, and to me, what the most important goal here is how do you cultivate influence? How do you have that ability to do it? And so the trust is there, right? So you've built that trust and you're continually developing that trust. Let's talk about cultivating. Cultivating is an interesting term too. Cultivating influence. So let's talk about that. We all want to influence positively. For people who want to influence negatively, we've got another whole podcast on it, right? Negativity bias and narcissism and all that stuff. But let's talk about cultivating influence. That's what we are as consultants. That's what we are as leaders. What do you guys think about this part of it? Again, this is the pinnacle I would look at, right? What do you think about as cultivating?
It's such an active word.
It is.
Right? I mean, of course, all of these, to Kat, to your point, all of these are action words that are very intentional. I was thinking about some conversations that I've been having with some of the different engineers and talking about some of the future technology and how we think about it, how we talk about it, right? And so, what I'm trying to do is influence and move folks to action in terms of research and engaging with this, right? And so, many times it's sort of thinking about what my goals are, what their goals are, and where we have shared overlap, right? And so where I can find that point, then I can sort of engage them and sort of say, hey, I think this is where we can go. I think this is what we can do. So there's a level of inclusivity with the way that I'm trying to approach that to sort of influence an outcome and a set of actions, activities, and that sort of thing. So I think finding some of that common ground, a common purpose, really can really help sort of cultivate that influence.
I love that. And, one of the pieces there's a positive impact, right? The positive impact, it is difficult to influence when it's going to be a negative impact, right? That's not influence. That's called coercion or something along those lines. So the positive impact, and it's a mutual positive impact in most cases when you're influencing. The other piece that comes to mind for me, which I think, I don't know of many other styles that cultivate influence as much as servant leadership. And servant leadership means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. To me, it means putting the best interest of others in front and making sure you're intentionally have a positive impact on, but you're looking for ways to help. I mean, this company, in general, we get new folks on. I see everybody jump in the ring to be servant leaders. Our senior leaders are servant leaders. There's nobody that's not going to roll their sleeves up. Our clients adore that. Our clients look for that. I remember in some of the conversations with folks that we started doing business with, when asked, why do you continue to do business with? Because they believe we have their best interest at hand. They believe when they have the 2:00 meeting, it's going to be a positive impact when they're meeting with Method. Mm-hmm. They believe that we're doing things to make them look better, right? And so that's a differentiator. That's a big differentiator. Yeah. And so when I think about cultivating influence, putting those mindsets on and understanding when you influence somebody, you're potentially getting them to do something either that they didn't know they could do, or they weren't ready to do, right? Or they didn't know they could do, right? When you start going through those sequences, influencing them to do it or influencing them to allow you to do something, that's powerful. That's extremely powerful. So the positive piece always comes to mind for me. So, closing with servant leadership and that positive, that's what I want to get from the two of you. Like, what do you feel when you say that positive impact, doing for others, that servant leadership, the putting the others in place? I mean, stuff there kind of hit top of mind as you guys are going through the thought of just influence in general.
You go first. I can go. Yeah. So this is tied to the word cultivating for me, very much so. I think of like my farmer friends, and just the servant's heart that is required to put this tiny seed into the ground, take care of a very tender reed, as Matt Miller calls it, and, tend to it day after day, take care of it until it turns into something that is like a mighty oak tree or producing fruit. And there's a lot of frustrating moments in the life of a farmer that can, if you handle it the wrong way, I think can, we were talking about unwind the influence that you're having in the field. And then there's also just like this really big payoff, right, when it works out the right way. So I like, again, that choice of word. And I do want to say, I think, we kind of moved off it a little bit, but to me, these last two are so intricately connected, the trust and the influence, because I think especially in today's society, people can kind of declare that they're an influencer. And for me, having come
$14 for that check mark. And
yeah, exactly. But, and I know I'm a little bit of a skeptic when I say this, but, coming from like a branding and marketing world, I see this a lot. And, people kind of come and say like, well, I'm an influencer. And I'm like, well, what makes me trust your opinion? What credibility, what have you done for the people who are already following you? What, and you can use, some pretty easy mechanisms to understand, are they really doing this with the intention of, benefiting not only themselves, but their community. And so I think a lot of times you kind of have to investigate that a little bit further in today's society to say like, okay, who is actually an influencer? Because a lot of times the influencer is the quietest person in the Instagram chat room or in the, in the boardroom. 100%. I talked to you about this conversation I had recently, with this woman in our community who I think maybe does it better than anyone I've seen. And most of the time during that discussion, she was asking questions and she heavily influenced the outcome of that discussion. And everybody else was doing all the talking. And I knew it was happening, but I stepped away from it. And like 2 hours later, I was like, that is masterclass. I want to be like that, but there's, I think all of that is just really connected. I think there's a real danger and pitfall in just kind of being able to say, I am this.
Sure.
And I think there's a real big payoff when you actually are spending that time cultivating, and, understanding that you might be starting with a very, very tiny seed and spending time.
And if I can interject on your point there, of like, how do I know I can trust your influence or your leadership? I don't think there's any better way I don't think there's any better litmus test than to look at somebody who is a servant leader and like, can I trust you? Because you can go directly to the people who they are leading. If you're serving your people well, they will support you come hell or high water, right? And so, you quickly figure out who isn't a servant leader, right?
yeah.
Like that's it's
yeah.
like you go to the people you're influencing, and it's a pretty cut and dry scenario most times. Right?
It is.
Yeah.
So
true.
I've found that to be
It is
very helpful.
Yeah.
It is, and you know, it's funny. Nothing influences someone more than them believing they got there themselves. Asking them questions, and all of a sudden, you know, there was that. I go to movies all the time, but My Big Fat Greek Wedding, when the wife says, you know, that he may be the head of the household, but I'm the neck. I'll turn it whichever way I want. The reality there is when you do ask questions, and you do get buy-in, you do get people start to realize that they haven't been always led there. They went there themselves. And that's an ability to influence, right? When you can ask those questions and there's a trusting zone. But the piece I would think, and I don't know that person well, but my assumption is people knew she was asking the questions with all positive intent, no malicious intent.
Right.
And that there was a high level of regard and respect and trust that was already there.
That's absolutely
to be able to answer those questions. Because if you don't have any of that, you're manipulative.
Yeah.
That's kind of where I was going. You know, I like the question piece.
Yeah.
When I think too, like, you know me, I know that they made this into a cycle, and I'm going to go like, oh, but you can also go back. This goes all the way back, you know, not just to the previous stage, but also to that embracing differences thing, and also kind of like embracing differences of the situation and the person that you might be talking to. And I feel like this is a lesson I'm still learning, you know, even today. Maybe I'm a little bit better at it than I was in my 20s, but it's like you're not going to be able to influence every situation
what a great call.
to the degree that you might want. And you also have to embrace that difference too. Not everyone is going to be receptive to your message. They might hear the same message. We all know this has happened in our lives, right? They might hear the same message from another person better. And professionally, I have definitely had moments where I tried to, you know, really persuade someone of a stance that I felt really strongly about, and it wasn't working. And then I pulled another person on my team aside and said, hey, can you go talk to this person? Because I know they will listen to you for thus and such reason. And that's okay. You know,
It is okay.
It was hard for my like 25-year-old self to fully embrace
I don't
that.
have the power for this.
Yeah, but you know, it's everyone's having different days or just different styles of communication and all of that. And I think you got to like kind of recognize that there's places where you have a lot of influence and there's places where maybe you have less, and leverage someone else that can, you know, bring something to the table in that moment.
Yeah. You know, one of the things about servant leadership, and I kind of like how you talked about the farmer and planting. I think you show up to servant leadership with this sort of base understanding is that I exist as part of something bigger, right? When you can embrace the concept that there's something bigger than yourself, and that's not and that statement doesn't make you small, right? That can make you integral to that. And so when you show up that way, then investing in someone makes sense because you're like, we're part of this big thing.
It's really powerful,
right?
actually.
And so I think it's sort of that posture, that sort of understanding that if you show up in that way, it makes sense for you to invest and grow and nurture and that sort of thing, because you're like, the dividends are well beyond me. It's us, it's we, right? It's being part of that bigger thing. So I think quite often sometimes it's going back and it's like, are we understanding that we're part of something bigger? And are we willing to be part of something bigger? And are we willing to share the spotlight?
Oh yeah. And you know, the title of this, MG, to what you were going through just now, the title of this is Unlocking Human Potential. The pieces you were just talking through, when you unlock human potential, when they all do, you're unlocking a lot of something bigger. You know, when everybody, you give the platform and the ability to help people unlock that potential, the accumulation of all is huge. And that's, to me, like unlocking everybody's and then understanding the broader impact that can have. That's a powerful thing, just in general.
It really is. And I was having this conversation with someone the other week, and we were talking about them being an individual contributor and you know, writing code and kind of being a star coder, and what would it mean for them to move to sort of lead engineers. And we were talking about like, so let's think about the value, right? Yep, you can be in there, you can be writing that one piece of code, and obviously that'd be valuable. But if you move to, say, a team lead and you really cultivated and really grew that team, now you multiply the value.
Yeah.
Right? You multiply the value that you can bring, right? And so when you have the capacity, capability, and willingness then to sort of invest and help train others, right? The value spreads.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And it's like, isn't that what we want?
It is. It is. And, there's an underlying piece, and you hit it, Kat. And I think, Michael, right at the end of that person getting into the bigger role, something that helps all of these phases is being a really good communicator, right? Being, harnessing every ounce of your effort to get better and better and better at communicating, to build rapport. If you continue to be a better communicator and work on that, you're going to have better rapport.
Yep.
And you just keep going through the line, right?
Yeah.
And so communication, the ability to really understand and think about our world, right? Not all of it's face-to-face. We have a hybrid approach now. We have these Zoom calls, right?
Yep.
We have a lot of writing. Slack messages are flying. Emails flying. So it's not just verbal, it's written.
That's right.
And really getting better and better at that craft, and getting better and better at the ability to communicate in any scenario, in any situation, whether it's a hard one, an easy one, a funny one, it doesn't matter. All of that is going to play a big role in how good are you at building relationships, because it is very difficult to build rapport and understand and embrace and build trust if you can't communicate, read tone, tell tone, all these things. So I do want to end on that, right? So what do you guys think about that? When we talk about it in the book, they talk about it a lot. How good your communication is will play a big role about what level you get to in your intelligence when it comes to relationships. What do you guys think about that? And there are there any tips, tricks, thoughts, or just opinions and stories that you have around communication as a big part of building that intelligence?
So again, having been an English major and finding ourselves in a very kind of fast-paced digital world, it's actually kind of funny to me because lots of people who hated writing class have to write all day. I'm guilty of this. Slack is an extremely powerful tool, and before that, IM was, and text and email before that. But with that speed and productivity, I think deliberate thinking as you're writing is harder to do.
Oh, yeah.
I know, like, one example I can think of, like, especially in, some of the places that we might have worked at before where emails were 300-400 emails a day. And it gets frustrating because you're like, I can never clean out my inbox, And then there gets to be that one email that's, going to require a thoughtful response to navigate maybe a difficult situation. And I can't tell you how many times I would write the email and then put it in my draft folder and get up in the morning and go, okay, now I'm going to revisit it and I'm going to edit it and then I'm going to send it. Because I wanted to slow down. I think that counts for verbal too. But, I think first of it, just like Slack, going back to even like the stage of building rapport, I still catch myself doing this because, I have this like task-oriented knee-jerk reaction of launching a Slack message to someone with no context and just immediately asking a question and then going, good morning, how are you doing?
That's great.
Or what's on your mind?
It's so true.
And it's because we're moving so fast and that tool is just, it enables us to do it. Yeah.
It's too easy. Yeah, you're right though, because it's a quick one, right? As you're building, say it's a new person you're working with on the team and all of a sudden you just getting to the point. Mm-hmm. It's not the niceties and all, but the reality is think, have you built rapport with them yet at all? Right? Do you know who they are? Do you understand how they're going to receive you? Do they know you enough? Have you built trust for them to know your tone? Right.
Yeah.
I agree with you when you think back through the steps because it's too easy.
Yeah, I was going to say is when you asked the question, the first word came to mind was pause.
Pause.
Mm-hmm. So, certain types of communication are appropriate through certain mechanisms,
Yeah.
right? There's certain conversations that the person you're communicating with deserves a level of respect for there to be a one-on-one sort of conversation. Right. Because you need them to understand the fullness of your communication, your tone, your voice, your body language, all those things are very important, and there shouldn't be room for misinterpretation, right? Is this type of communication that warrants that? To your point, is there a level of trust such that I will get the benefit of the doubt if there's some misreading of what I wrote, right? Is that there that will allow me to put this in text, right? Versus that, right? That the context, right? So, I think sort of pausing and thinking about what am I communicating, who am I communicating it to, what's going to be the most effective sort of mode of communication, should I have in this, right? I the number of times when I'm watching a thread go across Slack, and the next thing you know, I put a Zoom meeting in there. No,
get this out of that channel. That's right.
Number one, you just wasted a lot of brain cycles. Everyone reading through this, right? And we can resolve this thing in 15 minutes, right? Let's actually get on and communicate. Let's share our humanity here.
And MG, it's funny because new tools keep coming on how to communicate. Nothing goes away. Just keeps adding to it, right? So what I'd love to do, Josh, because the next in this series, we're going to focus on mastering, like communication, e-communication, reading tones, nonverbal cues. That's what we're going to hit on, right? So the big part here is it's a little bit of a cliffhanger, right? It's like we talked about relational intelligence. We talked about the 5 pieces, all the components to it, why that's a differentiator for method. Like that's why people come here. That's why they stay here, right? A big underlining is got to get your communication right in order to be able to do it. So for me, what I'd like to do is just pause it there, unless we've got some other last points, and say, more to come on communication, because it is a crucial part, and we'll have more discussion on that. So Josh, any parting?
No, I'd just like to say, in case for those who have been listening or watching, I think it's safe for me to say, if you're internal and you have questions about the content that we're talking about here, I know that these 3 would welcome. Probably the easiest way for our internal folks is just Slack, just
Send
hitting
Slack.
Slack.
Go to Slack.
Back to Kat's point. Reach out via Slack or email. And then for the folks who might be outside of the company listening, who want, you can always reach most of our folks on LinkedIn, and we love setting up coffee meetings and all of that kind of thing. So I'm sure these folks would be more than happy to connect with questions and conversations that our listeners might have. So,
and MG, thank you. Kat Carter, thank you. Josh, as always, we're rolling.
I'm just thankful that you all are willing to come onto the podcast and share. I like being just kind of a part of fly on the wall to all the knowledge that you bring to the table. So thank you for coming in and sharing your time with us.
Thanks for having us. It's great to be here.
Thanks for having us.
Focus on the human. Let's roll.
There we go.
Thanks, guys.
All right.